Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time. Not to a grand medieval castle or a bustling market square, but to something far more fundamental and, frankly, terrifying. The everyday struggle to survive a medieval winter. We're going to put ourselves in the shoes of someone living 8,000 years ago. Feeling the constant, bone-deep chill that modern life has all but erased. Imagine, if you will, the wind rattling the flimsy shutters of your wattle and daub cottage. A sound that promises not just discomfort, but genuine danger. Picture the steam from your breath crystallizing in the air as you trudge through a snow-covered field. The kind of cold that feels less like a temperature and more like a physical presence. A constant enemy you can never truly defeat. You probably won't survive this. But don't worry, we're just here to observe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening from somewhere cozy, maybe let me know where you are and what time it is for you in the comments below. It's always fun to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your medieval world doesn't have the luxury of a thermostat. When the first frost bites, it's a stark reminder that life is about to get a whole lot harder. Your first, and most immediate, enemy is the cold itself. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a predator. You feel it in the tips of your fingers and toes. A creeping numbness that signals the start of a very dangerous process. This isn't the kind of cold you can shake off with a warm jacket. This is the kind that seeps into your bones, leading to a condition you know all too well but can do little to prevent: frostbite. The pain starts as a sharp sting, a pinprick sensation that you initially dismiss. Then, as the circulation slows, it becomes a dull ache, a heavy, dead feeling. You learn quickly to recognize the pallid, waxy look of skin that has succumbed to the cold. The way it becomes stiff and unresponsive. You know that if you don't act quickly, and your options are extremely limited, those parts of you will turn black, shrivel, and eventually fall off. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly understood the science behind frostbite. But they certainly understood the result. The loss of a finger or a toe was a common, brutal reality of winter. A simple trip to the outhouse on a frigid night could cost you a digit. One quirkier tidbit is how they tried to treat it. Some sources suggest they would rub the affected area with snow, believing it would draw out the cold. Of course, we know now that this is one of the worst things you could do, as it only causes more tissue damage, but it makes a certain kind of grim sense from their perspective. The constant vigilance required is exhausting. You find yourself checking your extremities obsessively, flexing your fingers and toes, and constantly wiggling them to keep the blood flowing. Every time you venture outside, you're on high alert, because a simple stumble or a brief moment of inattention could lead to a permanent, painful consequence. This reality shapes everything about your winter. You don't dawdle, you move with purpose, driven by a primal need to get back to whatever meager warmth you can find. A mainstream historical fact from this era is that many medieval armies, often on the march during the colder months, suffered massive casualties not from battle, but from the brutal combination of exposure and frostbite. For you, the danger isn't an enemy army, but the silent, relentless cold that stalks you every single day. The frost on the windowpane isn't just a pretty picture, it's a reminder of the ever-present threat just beyond your walls, as you manage to keep your fingers and toes from becoming icicles. Another more insidious and constant threat takes over: the slow, grinding fear of an empty stomach. The bountiful harvests of late summer and autumn are now a distant memory. The fields are barren, and the trees are skeletal. Survival now depends entirely on what you and your family manage to put away. Your diet shifts dramatically, becoming a monotonous cycle of preserved, salted, and dried foods. You probably miss the taste of a fresh apple or a juicy roast. But those are luxuries for the harvest festivals. Now, you live on the sustenance that will last, not the stuff that tastes good. You pull a hunk of salted pork from a hanging hook in your cottage, the brine making your eyes water just a little. The salt is a lifesaver, but it's also a constant presence in every meal. You'll gnaw on hard, dry cheese and chew on stale bread that has been baked to last for weeks, if not months. The vegetables you do have are root crops: carrots, turnips, parsnips, which you've stored in a root cellar. A dark, damp hole in the ground you dug specifically for this purpose. You'll also eat a lot of dried peas and beans, which you'll soak for days just to make them soft enough to cook. This is what's known as the famine gap, a term historians use to describe the period between the end of the stored harvest and the beginning of the new one. And it's a gap you live in every single winter. One of the quirkier tidbits about this time is the surprisingly high consumption of beer and ale. In an age where water quality was a constant gamble, fermented beverages were often a safer option. You probably start your day with a weak, thin ale, not for the buzz, but for the hydration and calories. It's a bit like drinking a liquid loaf of bread, and it's a staple for everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest elder. You'd never get drunk on the stuff you're drinking, it's too weak for that, but it's a reliable, if unexciting, way to stay hydrated without risking the stomach cramps and worse that come from bad well water. Of course, you still need to get that water to make the ale, which is its own cold, miserable chore, but we'll get to that later. The feeling of being constantly hungry. Not in a modern, I could use a snack, way, but in a deep, gnawing sense of emptiness, is something that never truly leaves you. You portion out every scrap of food with painstaking care. A half-eaten loaf of bread isn't a thing. Every crumb is accounted for. The thought of waste is not just distasteful, it's a betrayal of your future self. You're always thinking ahead, counting the days until the spring thaw, wondering if what you have will be enough. The mainstream historical fact here is that famine was a constant companion to life in the Middle Ages, with countless chronicles detailing widespread starvation, especially after a particularly harsh winter or a bad harvest. Your meager stores feel like an island in a sea of potential hunger. Historians still argue about the exact caloric intake of the average medieval peasant, but what's clear is that it was nowhere near what we'd consider a healthy amount. Especially during the long, lean winter months, you can feel the weight dropping off you, your body burning through its fat reserves just to stay warm. Every meal is a victory, a small act of defiance against the season. But you know that with every bite, your pantry is getting emptier. With the gnawing hunger now a dull ache in your belly, your focus turns inward, to the very heart of your small world, the hearth. It's not just a fireplace, it's the beating heart of your home. The one place where you can feel a modicum of warmth. You spend your nights huddled by its glow, a precious, fragile thing that you tend with the utmost care. The fire is your only sanctuary from the cold that presses in from all sides. You're close enough that the heat radiates into your tired bones, but not so close that an errant spark might catch on your frayed wool tunic. The constant hiss and crackle of the burning logs is the soundtrack to your winter. A sound that is both comforting and a little terrifying. This is where you eat, sleep, and live for the next few months. Your family gathers close, a small huddle of humanity against the vast, dark cold. The warmth from the fire means you are all living in a tiny, smoky bubble. The smoke, in fact, is one of the hearth's biggest drawbacks. Your cottage doesn't have a proper chimney, just a small hole in the roof to let the smoke out. Most of it, however, just hangs in the air, a thick, gray haze that stings your eyes and makes you cough. You've grown used to the constant irritation, but you know it's not good for you. Historians still argue about the long-term health effects of this constant smoke inhalation on medieval peasants. But it's a fair bet that it contributed to a host of respiratory ailments. Your lungs feel heavy and tight, and you breathe in the smell of wood smoke and ash with every breath. It gets into your clothes, your hair, everything. A mainstream historical fact about medieval homes is that the central hearth was often the only source of light as well as heat. The fire's glow is what allows you to see after the sun sets at 3 in the afternoon, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls of your cottage. You learn to read by firelight, to mend torn garments by its flickering glow, and to tell stories to your children in the shifting light. The fire is a storyteller in its own right, its movements turning the simplest objects into monstrous shapes in the dark. A quirky tidbit from the time is the practice of banking the fire before bed. You carefully cover the embers with a layer of ash, a kind of primitive insulator, to keep them glowing all night. This allows you to restart the fire in the morning without having to go through the difficult process of creating a new spark, which in an age before matches, was a truly miserable chore involving flint, steel, and a lot of patience in the cold. But even this sanctuary holds its own dangers. You live in constant fear of a stray ember. Your cottage is made of flammable materials, thatch, wood, dried grasses, and a small spark could ignite your home in seconds, leaving you and your family out in the brutal cold with nothing. You watch the fire with a hawk-like intensity. Even as you drift off to sleep, your dreams a strange mix of warmth and fear. Remember that constant vigilance from when you were worried about frostbite? It applies here, too. You can never fully relax. Your entire life, your home, and your family's survival are tied to this one flickering flame. And so you huddle, you watch, you cough, and you pray that this precious, fragile thing will last you until morning. With the flickering hearth offering its meager, smoky comfort, you become painfully aware of the one thing separating your fragile, warm bubble from the merciless cold outside, your clothes. You are not wrapped in Gore-Tex or Patagonia, but in wool and linen, fabrics that, while better than nothing, are a woefully flimsy defense against a medieval winter. Your wardrobe is probably the same 3 layers you've been wearing for months. Now threadbare, scratchy, and perpetually damp, the innermost layer is a linen tunic, meant to absorb sweat and protect your skin from the coarse wool. The middle layer is a thicker wool tunic, and the outermost is a heavy wool mantle or cloak. That's it, no down feathers, no thermal lining, and certainly no waterproof technology. You pull your wool cloak tighter around your shoulders, the rough fabric a familiar irritant against your neck. You can feel the cold seeping through the weave of the cloth. A constant, low-level chill that permeates every moment of your waking life. When you venture outside, the wind slices through the layers as if they aren't even there. Rain, or more likely, sleet, soaks the wool, and once wet, it takes an eternity to dry by the smoky fire, often smelling of damp sheep for days afterward. A mainstream historical fact is that wool was the primary textile for most of the population in medieval Europe because of its availability and insulating properties. But the quality varied immensely. Your wool is probably the scratchiest, thickest kind, sheared from a local sheep, not the finely spun, soft merino we have today. A quirky tidbit from this time is that you probably don't have separate clothes for day and night. You sleep in the same clothes you wear all day, adding another layer of grubby, itchy reality to your existence. The idea of pajamas is a futuristic fantasy. This not only makes you constantly uncomfortable but also means your clothing is never truly clean or dry. It's a constant battle against dampness. And dampness, in this age, is a killer. Historians still argue about the exact prevalence of specific skin diseases caused by this lack of hygiene and constant dampness. But it's a safe bet that rashes, sores, and lice are an everyday part of your life. The constant itching from the rough wool and the uninvited guests living in your clothes is just another layer of discomfort you have to endure. You can't just throw your tunic in the washing machine. Washing clothes is a major undertaking that requires a lot of water and a warm day. A luxury you don't have in the depths of winter. So you just endure the smell and the feel of them, hoping they'll last you until spring. Every time you step outside, you feel the cold on your face and hands, and you instinctively pull your hood up and your hands into your sleeves. Your shoes are probably a simple leather sole with a loose leather upper, which offers almost no protection from the slush and mud. You can feel the cold seeping up through the soles, making your feet feel like blocks of ice. The luxury of dry, warm feet is a memory you have from summer, not a reality of your present. Remember that tingling in your toes from the first section? It's a feeling you're all too familiar with now. A constant reminder of the fragility of your existence. Your clothes are your only real defense, and they are failing you with every passing moment. As your flimsy wool clothing fails to keep out the cold, you start to feel another, more psychological pressure. The tyranny of the sun. Or rather, its absence. The sun becomes a distant memory. A pale, anemic orb that barely crests the horizon before disappearing again. You deal with the profound psychological toll of short, gray days and long, dark nights. The world outside your smoky cottage feels dead, dormant, and hostile. You trudge through the day in a perpetual twilight. And by the time you've finished your meager meal, it's already pitch black outside. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a soul-crushing reality. You wake up in the dark. The fire only a weak glow from banked embers. The sun rises sometime after you've already started your day's miserable chores, casting a weak, watery light that does little to warm the air. The short duration of daylight means there's less time for outdoor work and more time spent huddled indoors, where the monotony can become suffocating. The lack of sunlight affects your mood in a deep, biological way. You feel a creeping sense of melancholy, a listlessness that feels as heavy as the clouds that perpetually blanket the sky. Without the modern understanding of seasonal affective disorder, you just think of it as a normal part of the season. A kind of spiritual winter that matches the physical one. You can't just flip a switch to brighten a room. Your world is literally defined by the meager light the sun provides. A mainstream historical fact is that the shorter days of winter meant a massive shift in the work schedule. Farming, the primary occupation, largely ceases. You spend your days on maintenance tasks, mending tools, spinning wool, and caring for livestock, all within the cramped, dimmed confines of your home. A quirky tidbit from this era is the medieval belief in the winter solstice as a time of magical and spiritual significance. The celebration of Yule, with its feasting and rituals, was a way to welcome back the sun and ward off the malevolent spirits of the long night. These celebrations were not just for fun, they were a collective act of hope. A desperate plea to the universe for the return of light and warmth. You find yourself participating in these rituals with a desperate sincerity. Hanging a sprig of holly or mistletoe less as a decoration and more as a ward against the darkness you feel both outside and within. The constant darkness also creates a sense of foreboding and fear. With no streetlights, the world outside your door becomes a black abyss. You tell stories of ghosts, goblins, and other nocturnal terrors. And while you know they're just stories, the darkness makes them feel a little too real. Historians still argue about the exact psychological impact of this lack of light on the medieval psyche. But it's clear that it fostered a sense of deep superstition and a reliance on community and ritual to get through the long nights. Remember that flickering fire from the last section? It's not just a source of warmth, it's a tiny, defiant beacon against a world of overwhelming darkness. You find yourself staring into the flames for hours, hypnotized by the light, and trying to forget that the vast, cold blackness is just on the other side of your thin walls. The sun, when it appears, is a cruel tease, a brief flash of hope that is quickly swallowed by the encroaching night. As you endure the psychological weight of the sun's absence, you become more and more aware of the physical flaws of your little home. You're not living in a cozy, modern, well-insulated house. You're living in what amounts to a leaky sieve. Drafts, poor insulation, and a constant, pervasive chill make true warmth an impossible dream. You can huddle by the fire, but turn your back for a moment and you feel the icy fingers of the wind on your neck. The walls of your cottage are made of wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, straw, and dung slathered over a woven wooden frame. This construction is fine in summer, but in the winter, it offers the thermal resistance of a wet newspaper. The wind whistles through tiny cracks, a constant, mournful sound that never lets you forget the cold is always there, waiting. You can actually feel the difference in temperature between the center of your room, near the hearth, and the edges where the walls are. It's like being in two different seasons at once. A mainstream historical fact is that glass windows were an extreme luxury, reserved for the very wealthy or for churches. Your home has small shutters, and maybe a piece of animal hide stretched over a small opening to let in a little light. But they are far from airtight. You can see the frost growing on the inside of your walls. A delicate, feathery pattern that is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. This constant exposure to the elements means that even your indoors is a cold, damp, miserable place. The floor is likely packed dirt, which soaks up the cold from the ground and releases it slowly into your living space. You can feel the chill rising from the floorboards even through your flimsy shoes. A quirky tidbit is the use of tapestries and woven wall hangings. While we often think of these as decorative items for castles, even a humble peasant might hang a piece of woven cloth on the wall. Not for aesthetic purposes, but as a rudimentary form of insulation. It wouldn't do much, of course, but even the illusion of a barrier between you and the cold was a small comfort. Historians still argue about the exact methods and materials used by peasants to improve their homes' insulation. But it's clear that the battle against drafts was a daily, losing one. You spend your spare moments stuffing rags and straw into cracks. A futile gesture that you repeat every day, just to feel like you're doing something. The moisture from your breath, from the food you're cooking, and from the general dampness of the season condenses on every cold surface. The walls are clammy to the touch, and your clothes feel perpetually a little bit damp. This dampness, combined with the cold, means you are never truly dry, which only exacerbates the chill. Remember that scratchy wool from before? Now imagine it's also constantly a little bit moist. This is your reality. The cold isn't just outside your house, it's a part of your house. It permeates the very fabric of your life. A constant, low-level antagonist that you can only ever hold at bay for a little while, but never truly defeat. As you shiver by the hearth, the constant dampness and drafts of your home become a breeding ground for another relentless enemy, sickness. In this age, a simple cold isn't just an annoyance you get over with some tea and rest, it's a potential death sentence. Your immune system is already under siege from a poor diet and constant cold exposure. Now, you're cooped up in a smoky, crowded space with your family and perhaps even some animals, sharing germs with a terrifying efficiency. A cough from your sister isn't just a cough, it's a terrifying portent of what could be a serious, life-threatening fever. You feel a tickle in your throat, and your heart sinks. You've seen what happens when the winter sickness takes hold. A low fever that you try to ignore becomes a raging inferno. Your body shaking with chills and burning with heat. Without any modern medicine, no Tylenol, no antibiotics, not even a simple cough syrup, your only recourse is to huddle closer to the fire. Drink weak herbal teas, and hope your body is strong enough to fight it off. The mainstream historical fact is that winter was a period of high mortality, especially for the very young and the very old. Simple illnesses that we barely think about today, like influenza or pneumonia, could and did wipe out entire families and villages. You live with the constant, low-level dread of getting sick, knowing that you are gambling with your life every time you feel a sniffle. A quirky tidbit from the time is the use of sympathetic magic as a form of treatment. You might wear a necklace of dried herbs, or hang a piece of amber by your bed, believing that these items have the power to ward off disease. Of course, they do nothing, but the psychological comfort they provide is a small comfort in a world of little hope. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of medieval herbal medicine. While some plants, like willow bark, did contain salicin, the precursor to aspirin, the dosages were inconsistent, and the treatments were often mixed with superstition, making their true efficacy a subject of ongoing debate. You try to remember which plant your grandmother told you to use for which ailment, but the information is a confusing jumble of fact and folklore. You're just hoping that this isn't the winter that the plague decides to make a return. Remember that constant vigilance from when you were worried about food and frostbite? It extends to your body, too. Every ache, every sneeze, every little sign of sickness is a cause for quiet panic. The cold outside and the sickness inside create a brutal feedback loop. The cold makes you more susceptible to illness, and the illness makes you more sensitive to the cold. You become a fragile, walking target for both. Your energy levels plummet, and simple tasks like fetching water or tending the fire become monumental efforts. You feel your body weakening, a slow, steady drain on your reserves. The idea of getting a full night's sleep is a joke. You're either shivering, coughing, or both. Your dreams are full of feverish images, and you wake up feeling no more rested than when you went to bed. Sickness is not just a seasonal inconvenience, it is a brutal, ever-present threat to your very existence. As your body battles the sickness festering in your crowded cottage, the world outside seems to shrink even further. The threat of illness and the brutal cold combine to make one of the most fundamental aspects of human life, travel, almost impossible. The world you inhabit grinds to a halt, trapping you within the small, familiar confines of your village. The once beaten paths that connected you to neighboring towns become impassable. The thin layer of soil gives way to a slick, frozen muck that makes every step a treacherous gamble. Snowfall, when it comes, buries the paths, and the deep drifts make it a monumental effort just to get from your home to the community well. You can't just hop in a car and drive to the next town over for supplies. Your entire world is now a small, isolated island in a vast sea of white. The mainstream historical fact here is that travel during medieval winters was incredibly dangerous and difficult. Roads, if they could even be called that, were poorly maintained even in the best of times. In winter, They were often completely impassable. Whether from mud, snow, or ice, long-distance trade largely ceased, and communication with the outside world all but stopped. For you, this means you are utterly and completely dependent on what is in your immediate vicinity. If you run out of something, salt, grain, firewood, there is no one coming to help. You're on your own. This isolation fosters a deep sense of community, but also a profound, existential loneliness. The outside world is not just far away, it's practically non-existent. A quirky tidbit from the time is the importance of ice bridges. While frozen rivers were a dangerous place to be, they could, under certain conditions, become temporary, and often life-saving, routes for travel. However, the risk was immense. You never knew if the ice was thick enough. And a quick dip into the freezing water was a guaranteed death sentence. For most, the risks far outweighed the rewards. And so you stay put. You watch the river from the bank. A frozen, silent thing. A barrier rather than a passage. Historians still argue about the frequency and safety of travel during winter. But the consensus is that most people simply hunkered down and did not venture far from home unless absolutely necessary. A trip to the forest to gather more firewood, for instance, becomes a major expedition, one that you would only undertake with a companion and a deep sense of dread. This lack of travel also has a psychological effect. Your world shrinks, becoming no bigger than the path between your home and the community hall. The faces you see every day are the same ones you've seen your whole life. And the gossip you hear is the same you've heard for a week. There is no new information, no new faces, no new ideas. The monotony is another layer of the winter's burden. Remember the feeling of being trapped indoors from before? Now imagine that the entire outside world is just as trapped. The landscape is a canvas of white and gray. A silent, empty space that makes you feel even smaller and more insignificant. You can't just get away from it all, there is nowhere to go. You are stuck, and the winter is your prison warden. With your world shrinking and your body constantly fighting off sickness, you realize that another aspect of your life has taken a serious nosedive, your hygiene. The concept of a daily shower is so alien it would be a source of great amusement to you. Bathing, in the depths of winter, is a luxury you simply cannot afford. Getting enough water for cooking and drinking is already a monumental chore. Using it to wash your body is out of the question. You're constantly a little bit dirty, a little bit smelly, and this leads to a host of other problems. You haven't had a proper bath in months. The cold water from the well is a shock to the system. And you know that taking a dip in it would only bring on a more severe chill, risking sickness and even death. The warm water from your cauldron is a precious resource, used for cooking and the occasional sponge bath of your face and hands. The rest of you is just there. You can feel the grime on your skin, a fine layer of dirt, ash, and sweat that accumulates day after day. A mainstream historical fact is that personal hygiene practices were vastly different in the Middle Ages. Full-body bathing was not a regular activity for most people, and in winter, it was all but abandoned. The smell of unwashed bodies and unwashed clothes is the background scent of your winter, a constant reminder of your situation. A quirky tidbit from the time is the use of dry baths, where people would rub their skin with linen cloths or even fine sand to scrub away some of the dirt without using water. It's a futile gesture, but it gives you the illusion of cleanliness. Historians still argue about the true frequency of bathing in the Middle Ages. While the wealthy and those in monasteries sometimes had access to heated baths, for a peasant like you, it was an extreme rarity. The lack of bathing also contributes to the constant itching and skin problems you're experiencing. You scratch at a persistent rash on your arm, a direct result of the lack of hygiene and the perpetual dampness of your clothes. Remember the lice we talked about? They are a part of this problem. 2. Finding a warm, undisturbed home in your hair and clothes. The lack of hygiene isn't just a matter of discomfort, it's a health issue. Open sores and small cuts can easily become infected. And without antibiotics, a simple infection can turn into something life-threatening. You are always picking at a splinter or a hangnail. And you know you have to be careful. But it's hard to be careful when your hands are chapped, dry, and constantly dirty. The dirt becomes a part of you, a kind of second skin that you can't shed. You've grown used to the feeling, the smell, and the constant itching. But it's another layer of the physical and psychological toll the winter is taking on you. It's not a choice, it's a necessity. You have to prioritize staying warm over staying clean. And that's a brutal reality to live with. With the world now a small, dirty, and dangerous place, you find that your time is not your own. Your days are consumed by the never-ending list of winter chores. This isn't a time for leisure, it's a time for survival. And survival is hard work. You are forced to chop wood and carry water, even as the cold seeps into your bones, making every movement a painful, slow process. You wake up with the first light, your body protesting the cold, and you know your first task is to make sure the fire doesn't go out. But to do that, you need wood, and the woodpile is always shrinking. You grab the dull, heavy axe, the metal so cold it feels like it's burning your hand. The wood you chop is often damp or frozen solid, and it takes a monumental effort to split it. You swing the axe again and again, your breath coming in ragged puffs of white vapor. The mainstream historical fact is that wood was not just for heat, it was the primary source of energy for all cooking and heating, making the collection of firewood an absolutely critical daily task. Without it, you would not survive. The feeling of exhaustion is a constant companion. But there's no rest. You can't just call a delivery service, you're the delivery service. A quirky tidbit from the time is the practice of gleaning for firewood. You might spend hours in the forest, not chopping down trees, which was often a right reserved for the lord of the manor, but picking up fallen branches and dead wood. It's a slow, painstaking process, and you're always on the lookout for a broken branch that might offer a little more fuel. Historians still argue about the exact amount of labor required to sustain a family through the winter. But it's clear that it was a back-breaking, full-time job. You can feel the toll it's taking on your body. The constant aches in your back and shoulders from the repetitive, strenuous labor. And then there's the water. The well is a solid sheet of ice, and you have to break through it with a heavy pick or a strong stick just to get to the precious liquid below. You fill your heavy wooden bucket, the water sloshing onto your already wet clothes, and you trudge back to your home, the weight of the bucket pulling at your arm. You have to do this multiple times a day. You can't just leave a tap running. Every drop of water is a drop of effort. Remember that dampness from a few sections ago? It comes from these chores. From the constant battle against a frozen world. Your hands are chapped and raw. A permanent landscape of cracks and bleeding cuts. All from the constant exposure to cold water and rough wood. These chores are not just tasks, they are a constant, physical reminder of your vulnerability and the immense, unyielding power of the season. As you continue your endless cycle of chopping wood and carrying water, you find that your living space has become a communal one in a way that modern life can't even comprehend. Your animals are no longer just livestock, they are part of the family. And they live with you in your small cottage. You share your living space with them, not because you enjoy the smell or the noise, but because it's the only way to keep them, and yourself, alive. A cow, a few sheep, or some chickens are far too valuable to leave out in the freezing cold. They represent your future food supply, your wool for clothing, and your ability to work the fields come spring. You can't let them die, so you bring them inside. You step over a sleeping sheep as you make your way to the hearth. The animal's gentle breathing a familiar sound in the dim light. The cow's warmth is a welcome addition to the room, a kind of biological heater that helps to offset the constant cold. A mainstream historical fact is that this practice, known as byre dwelling, was common among peasants throughout much of Europe. The heat generated by the animals' bodies was a significant, if smelly, contribution to the warmth of the home. The chickens roost in the rafters, their clucking and scratching a constant soundtrack to your days and nights. A quirky tidbit from the time is the belief that the animals' presence helped to ward off evil spirits, with their natural body heat and sounds being seen as a kind of protective charm. The smell, of course, is something else entirely. The air in your cottage is a thick, pungent mix of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and animal manure. The floor is a mix of packed dirt and straw, which soaks up the filth and is only cleaned on rare, warmer days. Historians still argue about the exact health implications of this close living arrangement. While the warmth was a clear benefit, the close proximity to animal waste and disease undoubtedly contributed to the spread of parasites and illnesses. You swat a fly that somehow managed to survive the winter. A gross little thing that you know is a vector for who knows what kind of sickness. This is your reality, you can't be squeamish. Your animals are your most valuable possession. And their survival is your survival. You find a strange comfort in their presence. A sense of shared misery and survival. You pat the cow's head. Its large, warm body a reassuring presence in the long, dark nights. You feel the slow, steady rhythm of its breathing. A silent promise that you both might just make it to spring. As you huddle with your family and your animals, the warmth they provide is a small comfort. But it does little to soothe the constant, low-level anxiety that gnaws at you. You are always on edge. The threat of starvation looms like a dark cloud over your village. And you must protect your limited resources from thieves, both human and animal. The feeling of scarcity creates a palpable tension in the air. Every single one of your neighbors is in the same boat. And you know that in a world without excess, a desperate person can do desperate things. A forgotten loaf of bread could be the difference between life and death for someone else. And you're all too aware of that. You find yourself instinctively pulling your cloak closer when you walk past a neighbor's house, even though you've known them your whole life. A mainstream historical fact is that winter was a time of increased social strife and even violence in medieval communities. The struggle for resources could pit neighbor against neighbor, and the communal bonds that were so strong in the summer could become strained to the breaking point. This is the brutal side of living in such a close-knit community. You know everyone. And you know exactly how desperate they are. A quirky tidbit from the time is the practice of winter watch, where a designated group of villagers would patrol the perimeters of the village at night. Not just to look for wolves, but to keep an eye out for people who might be trying to steal a chicken or a bundle of firewood. This is a kind of unspoken agreement among the community, a way of protecting the little that you all have. Historians still argue about the true frequency of theft and violence during these periods. But chronicles from the time often mention a rise in crimes during the colder, leaner months. You feel this in your gut. When you leave your home, you take care to secure the flimsy wooden door with a sturdy latch, even though you know it would offer little resistance to a truly determined thief. You are always counting your chickens, mentally tallying your remaining stores of grain, and wondering if it will be enough. Remember the feeling of the famine gap from a few sections ago? It's not just a concept, it's a constant, visceral fear. You are always protecting what's yours. But you also feel a pang of guilt. You know that if the tables were turned, you might be forced to consider the unthinkable. This fear of scarcity, this deep-seated anxiety, is another of winter's many gifts. A constant companion that never truly leaves you alone. Despite the gnawing fear and the constant struggle, something remarkable happens as you endure the winter. Life becomes a collective effort. Your entire community bands together. A single, living organism dedicated to ensuring everyone makes it through the season. The concept of individual survival gives way to the stark reality that you are all in this together. You can't survive alone, and you know it. This isn't a romantic ideal, it's a cold, hard necessity. You rely on your neighbors, and they rely on you, for a kind of mutual support that transcends the usual social structures. You spend a day helping your neighbor repair a weak spot in their roof. And you know that in return, he'll help you butcher a pig when the time comes. This is the unwritten contract of the community, a system of mutual aid born out of pure necessity. A mainstream historical fact is that this kind of communal cooperation was the bedrock of medieval village life. Tasks like plowing fields in the spring, harvesting in the fall, and, most importantly, surviving the winter, were all collective endeavors. You can't just stay in your home and let the world pass you by. You have to participate. Your survival is tied to the survival of the old widow who lives down the path. And her survival is tied to yours. A quirky tidbit from the time is the importance of communal stories and songs. In the long, dark nights, the village would often gather in the hall of the local lord or in the largest cottage. You would all share stories, both for entertainment and to pass down important lessons about survival, folklore, and the history of your people. The old woman who tells the story of the great famine of your grandfather's time isn't just entertaining you. She's reminding you of the dangers you face and the resilience of your community. Historians still argue about the true power of this oral tradition in shaping medieval society. But it's clear that it was a vital part of the winter experience. This sharing of stories is a way of reminding you all that you are not alone in this brutal struggle. The feeling of isolation you felt a few sections ago is now tempered by a sense of shared experience. You see the same exhaustion in your neighbor's eyes that you feel in your own. And there is a kind of silent understanding between you. This is the great paradox of winter. It is a time of immense hardship and isolation. But it also forges the strongest bonds of community. You know, without a shadow of a doubt, that if your house caught fire, your neighbors would be there to help you. And you would do the same for them. This is not charity, this is a collective act of survival. A defiance against the brutal indifference of the season. With the bonds of community holding you together, your mindset shifts with the seasons. You're not just enduring, you're finding solace in the rituals and beliefs that give meaning to your struggle. The long, dark nights and the constant cold are not just a physical reality, they're a spiritual one. You turn inward, finding strength in your faith and in the promise of spring's eventual return. This is the mental game of winter. And it's just as important as the physical one. You find yourself spending more time in quiet contemplation, praying to your patron saint for warmth, health, and a bountiful spring. A mainstream historical fact is that religion was an integral part of medieval life. And the winter months were marked by a number of religious holidays and rituals. The celebration of Christmas, or Christmastide, wasn't just a single day of gift-giving, it was a long, solemn season that offered a spiritual light in the darkest part of the year. You would attend services at the local church. The cold air inside the stone building a stark contrast to the flickering warmth of the candles and the collective body heat of the congregation. The rituals were a way of imposing order on the chaos of the natural world. A way of saying, we are not alone in this. A quirky tidbit from the time is the belief in specific saints who were said to offer protection against the cold and its associated ailments. You might have a small amulet or a prayer card dedicated to Saint Blaise, the patron saint of throats, hoping to ward off the coughs and fevers that plague your family. Historians still argue about the exact blend of pagan and Christian beliefs that existed in the medieval period. But what's clear is that you are drawing on a deep well of faith and folklore to get you through. You find yourself participating in rituals that have been passed down for generations. Not because you understand them all, but because they feel right. Because they connect you to your ancestors who also endured these same long, brutal winters. The winter is a time of spiritual reckoning. The lack of sunlight, the constant threat of death, and the isolation all force you to confront your own mortality. You are reminded, every day, of the fragility of your life. But this isn't a purely negative thing. It also gives rise to a profound sense of hope. A desperate, defiant hope that spring will come again. You look at the bare branches of the trees and you see not just skeletons, but the potential for new life. You find a seed you saved from the last harvest, and you hold it in your hand. A tiny, inert thing that contains the entire promise of the next year. This is the mindset you need to cultivate to survive. A deep, abiding faith in the cycle of life. A conviction that the darkness will not last forever. And then, one day, it happens. The world outside your window is still gray, still cold, but there is a subtle shift in the air. The sun, once a distant memory, hangs a little higher in the sky, and its warmth, while still a pale imitation of summer, feels different. You witness the world coming back to life, marking the end of your long, brutal winter. It's not a sudden event, but a slow, gradual thaw, a kind of slow-motion miracle that you have been waiting for with every fiber of your being. You step outside and you no longer hear the mournful whistle of the wind. You hear something else, the slow, rhythmic dripping of melting ice. The snow on the roofs of the cottages begins to soften, and icicles, once a beautiful and dangerous threat, start to fall and shatter on the muddy ground. The packed down snow on the paths turns to slush, a messy, glorious sign of life. This is the great thaw, and it is a powerful, emotional moment. A mainstream historical fact is that spring was not just a change in season, it was a time of immense celebration and relief. Your community would have rituals and festivals to mark the coming of spring. A way of collectively exhaling after holding your breath all winter. You would light bonfires, dance, and sing, not just for fun, but as a deep, primal act of thanks for making it through another year. A quirky tidbit from the time is the practice of beating the bounds. A ritual where villagers would walk the entire perimeter of their village's land, marking the boundaries and celebrating the new growth. It was a way of reclaiming the land from the winter. A kind of ceremonial walk to say, we're still here, and the land is still ours. you would feel the soft, yielding mud beneath your feet. A sensation that is so different from the hard, unforgiving ice you've walked on all winter. Historians still argue about the exact origins of these spring rituals. But what's clear is that they were a vital part of the medieval calendar. A way of reinforcing the bonds of community and welcoming the return of life. You see the first green shoots of grass poking through the mud. A tiny, defiant promise of the harvest to come. You feel a sense of hope. Not a vague, spiritual hope, but a tangible, visceral one. Remember that deep-seated anxiety you had about food? It begins to recede. The days are getting longer. And there is work to be done. You and your family will begin to prepare the fields for planting. You will clean out the animal pens and let them out to graze on the fresh, new grass. The monotony of winter is replaced by the bustle and hard work of spring. And you welcome it with open arms. The brutal cold, the constant fear, and the gnawing hunger are fading into a memory. You made it. You survived. The winter was a beast. But you outlasted it. Now, as the long journey is nearing its end, the world outside your window is getting softer. The colors returning. The harsh whites and grays are being replaced by the gentle greens and browns of a world waking up. The air no longer bites, it just feels fresh and cool. Your tired body can finally begin to relax a little, knowing that the worst is behind you. You can hear the birds chirping in the trees again, a sound that has been absent for so long it feels like a melody you just remembered. The long, brutal journey through the medieval winter is finally over. You can let go of the tension in your shoulders and the fear in your heart. The world is coming back, and you are with it. Rest now. The long winter is finally at its end. The warmth you feel is not just from the fire, it's from the world itself, welcoming you back. The fire is a gentle whisper now. The crackle of a few embers against the hushed backdrop of the cottage. The air, which once felt so thick with smoke and damp, is beginning to clear, carrying with it the faint, sweet scent of new soil from outside. You are no longer cold, a soft, lingering warmth has settled deep in your bones. A peaceful residue of the journey. You can feel the quiet rhythm of the cow's breath. A slow, steady pulse that lulls you into a state of deep calm. The worries of the season, the empty stomach, the chapped hands, the constant fear, are all fading. Distant echoes from a different time. Your mind is quiet. The endless cycle of chores and vigilance finally at a standstill. The world outside is a silent, gentle place. No longer a hostile entity but a sleeping giant, full of the promise of tomorrow. As your eyelids grow heavy and the final images of the winter fade, you can let yourself go completely. You are safe. You are warm. You are at peace. Sleep now, and dream of green fields and a soft summer sun.